whenever this decides to come on in. Come on in, come on in, come on in, come on in. I know it's a surprise. I'm doing all of these shows at these different times, but here we are. Hey, hey, hey. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Santita Jackson Show, AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. Happy 4th of July, everybody. Yes, yes, yes. What is the state of our union? What is it? This big, beautiful bill, which is being debated as we tape the show on the floor of the House of Representatives, it just might pass. If it passes, there is a Yale study that shows that in excess of 51,000 people will die in 1 year alone. Just break that out into 50 states. That's a little bit more than 1,000 people per state. Think about that. Think about that. $1 trillion have been moved from healthcare and moved over into the military. Is that what you want? Is that what you want? Who are we? Just what are we? Well, you know what? We've had this man on the show. He's part of the family here. He's written a trilogy of books. That's the way I see it. You know, he first came to my attention, well, actually sometime before, but I loved his book, Rat Effed. Ooh. It really told the true story of the secret plan to steal our democracy. I know that's one of the subtitles, but honestly, it's true. What happened? The plot to overtake our country by the right wing as soon as Barack Obama was elected. And it was overt. The fact is, this really started as we got the Voting Rights Act, as we got the Civil Rights Act, as we got all of these acts that included more and more people in the American project, including white women serving on juries, by the way. The greatest beneficiaries of DEI are white women, and affirmative action is white women. So a lot of people, most Americans were included in this period, but there was something that just really clicked for the right wing when President Obama won the office. And they said, okay, you can take the presidency, but we're going to take everything else. And they proceeded to do that. That's rat effed. Then we have unrigged as we sought to fight to gain what we had lost. And really, now anti-democratic, which is the third book in this trilogy. It really helps us to see how the right wing just has not stopped. He shows you this far right plan, and it's been a 50-year plot to control our country. That's right. So you've got rat effed, you've got unrigged, you've got anti-democratic. These are three books that you've got to get. And I think it's important to speak with David Daley at this moment. When I reached out to you yesterday, you said, do you really want to talk to me during this 4th of July? I said, absolutely. Because many people are saying that as we look at this big, beautiful bill, as we're watching the shredding of the social safety net, as we're seeing the tech bros turn our government into a technocracy. If you call just about anywhere, you get an AI. You don't even get a person. You get AI. And AI makes a lot of mistakes. And AI, sadly, is also sentient. It feels. It threatened to expose the affair in a test of someone who had fed the AI. Someone who set it up. They said, oh, you want to dismantle me? You want to turn me off? Well, guess what? I will expose your affair to your wife. That's AI. So, yeah, I want to speak with you because as we're watching these votes tally in the U.S. House of Representatives, as we look at them in the Senate, you have been telling us that the aspirations of most Americans have been gerrymandered out of power. That there are far fewer, and it's not even about a Democratic Party, it's just about your point of view, that those who represent your point of view have been gerrymandered out of power. They've been gerrymandered out of representation. So the laws that are being passed are not reflective of what it is that you want. So yes, David Daley, fair vote. I wanted to talk to you today. Because as we're on the 249th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence, next year will be a great old 250. I think it's important for us to find out the state of our union because this is coming down to votes. And it is, I can't shake what you've been telling us for years. You've been saying, I want you to lay out just first the numbers. You said, wait a minute, Democrats should have far more numbers in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the Senate than they do, which would make all the difference in the world. This bill could be defeated. Lives could be saved. That's not going to happen, David Daley.
It is not going to happen, no. And first, thank you for having me on. Happy 4th, everybody, and my apologies for the noise in the background. I'm amidst all kinds of construction zones on all sides of me. It's the dismantling of our democracy happening all around us. That is the sound you are hearing. Yeah, I think you're exactly right. I mean, to me, this is a question of representation. And there is a huge representation gap just about everywhere in our democracy. That representation gap begins in state legislatures and the U.S. House of Representatives, both of which are supposed to be the branches of government that are most responsive to you at a local and personal level. We have got right now about 35, if I'm being generous, competitive districts in all of America. That's out of 435 seats. So you're looking at 7 or 8% of the seats that are competitive any given year. And in reality, the number's a little bit lower even than that. You look at state legislatures. State legislatures in our most competitive states have been gerrymandered so completely for one side or the other. In most cases, this is gerrymandered by Republicans for Republicans, that when you look at places like Wisconsin and North Carolina, purple states, but you can barely call them democracies really at all. You look at the U.S. Senate with its proportionment of 2 senators per state that wildly favors smaller, rural, whiter states. If you were to go back and look at the Senate over all of these, past 3 decades, you would only have 2 years in that entire period of time that the Republicans in the U.S. Senate have actually earned more votes than the Democrats. And yet Republicans have what is effectively a stranglehold on the U.S. Senate now and have controlled it oftentimes in many years in which they have not come even close to winning more votes. You have an electoral college system that then really exacerbates the problem of representation in the House and in the Senate by weighting the votes for president in those smaller, whiter, rural states by giving them a boost of 2 electors in each state for their U.S. senators. And then you have the U.S. Supreme Court, which is the subject of my most recent book, and which has been the subject of what I call a 5-decade plot to really, and it's almost barely a plot because it's unfolded entirely in public, in order to try and turn what is supposed to be the highest tribunal dedicated to the rule of law and actually turning it into a super legislature of 9 hand-picked, robed partisans who are appointed for life, whose decisions are final, who are subject to no ethics code. And if you can appoint those justices, as we've seen over the course of the last couple of weeks especially, you have veto power over large swaths of American life and politics and policy. You look at the decision that the court made in the nationwide injunction case just last week. And essentially, what that says is that, after conservatives used nationwide injunctions to block much of what Barack Obama and Joe Biden tried to do via executive order, after just 4 months into the Trump administration, this Supreme Court said, no, that's not going to be an avenue any longer. It's an egregious double standard that says that executive orders by one party are going to be are going to be blocked judicially, and executive orders that are handed down by our side, you're not going to be able to contest at all. So I would say, as we pause and celebrate the 4th, that there's not a lot to celebrate on the representation side, that things are bad and they are getting worse, and it's going to be a whole lot of time and a whole lot of reform before we are able to fix what ails us.
And you say things are getting bad. They're bad and they're getting worse. What do you mean?
Well, what I mean by bad and getting worse is that we reapportion the U.S. House of Representatives after the census every 10 years. So in years ending in 0, we reapportion the House, which means the states that gain population gain more seats, and the states that lose population lose seats. What we're going to see after the 2030 census is as many as 4 new seats in Congress going to Texas, potentially at least 3 going to Florida, probably another 1 or 2 going to North Carolina and to Arizona each. Those seats are going to come at the expense of California, of New York, possibly Minnesota, probably Michigan, maybe, Rhode Island. So these are going to be blue seats that are going to turn into most likely red seats, because even though the population that is moving to these states is a purple population, right? It's both red and blue. When one side controls how the lines are drawn, you are able to control the distribution of seats in those states. So Florida right now, Texas right now, these are states that are probably 53, 47, 54, 46 states. But if you look at their congressional delegations, they've been drawn to be 75, 25, 80, 20, favoring the side drawing the lines. So these are going to be new Republican seats. Then, of course, when that happens, it also brings about a shift in electoral college votes. So California, New York, all of these states losing population are going to lose electoral college votes, and those votes will go to Texas, to Florida, to Georgia, to North Carolina, to Arizona, states that have been close but tend to go red. So we will see what the demographics of those states become. But this is going to mean, right, that if you look at the 2024 campaign, a lot of folks said, well, if Kamala Harris wins the blue wall and she wins the seat in the single vote in Omaha, Nebraska, she would get herself to 270 votes. Once these numbers change, that road to victory is no longer there. You would have to then carry Georgia, or you would have to carry Arizona plus Nevada. There become many more roads to victory for Republicans through the Electoral College after this, and for Democrats. But the numbers in the U.S. Senate get even starker. By 2035, it's said that about 70% of us are going to live in 15 states, which means that 70% of the population will have 30 U.S. senators. That is a pretty big amount of power for the 30% of the country that will be represented by 70 US senators. So the representation gap is worsening.
What could be done to remedy that? Because I don't know if we know how uneven all of this is. Like with the electoral college, some states have a winner take all system, others do not. And it just seems it's so wildly variant and unfair.
Yes, we could move to a national popular vote. That would be one way around all of this. We could certainly um, pass national legislation that puts an end to partisan gerrymandering, so that when Texas gains 4 seats, the party in power is not able to claim all of those seats for themselves. You would have to do that nationally. It's very difficult to do state by state, and the states where people have this power, they don't tend to want to give it up easily. When partisans have the power to draw the lines, they like that power. Whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they want to hold on to it. But I think we also have to think about very serious structural fixes to the US Senate, which could be done via statute. But it requires a big national conversation about why this is important, about the nature of representation. That conversation has to start. We need to be thinking really seriously about the Supreme Court. We have to be thinking about adding seats to the court. We need to be thinking about term limits, about ethics standards, about ways of modernizing a court that has become a deeply partisan super legislature, which gives outsized power in a democracy to 9 people and hands it to them for life. Americans of all walks of life, all political parties agree on this. There is about 75% approval for term limits and ethics codes for US Supreme Court justices. And I think we need to be thinking about alternate election systems. We need to be thinking about systems that are much more proportional in our state legislatures. And we need to be thinking about ranked choice voting, which, as we just saw in New York City in its mayor's election, actually gives voters more choice and more voice. When you have a race, as you did in New York, with 11 candidates that could conceivably be won by somebody with 30% of the vote, what ranked choice voting does is it triggers a series of instant runoffs that leads you to a majority winner all the time, so that choice can't be weaponized against voters at the polls. That makes choice a good thing again. There's lots of things we could do. We just have to get started.
I'm talking with David Daley. His latest book is anti-democratic. Anti-democratic. You've got rat-effed. Yes, rat-effed. You've got unrigged. You've got anti-democratic. And I've pulled all of these books together because they really take us inside of America right now, David Daley. Just where the project has had us land. And I think that as we go forward, we have to be very honest and forthright about where we are. Just what is a republic? What is democracy? Because we don't have a democracy. We don't. We have democratic elements, but they're under threat. You have autocracy. You have people. You have the oligarchs. We traded monarchy for oligarchy. And I think we've got to ask and answer these questions about what it is that we want and what it is that we need. Because right now, literally, we're watching a bill that is of tremendous consequence. And I don't know if people, Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, SNAP, WIC, foster children are all on Medicaid. This is going to cut so many of them out. All these issues that we're talking about are of tremendous consequence because these policies are voted on. They're voted on by people whom we elect. And what you're telling me is that I don't have the portal for me to elect the person that I want, to get the representation that I want and or need. It's been closing. And now it's like it's almost closed, David.
They have barely been elected and they can barely be defeated. And
Wow.
that is a very dangerous situation. Um, they have been elected from gerrymandered rigged districts. They have been elected by winning partisan primaries, oftentimes with as little as 17 or 24 or 32% of the vote. And then
Mhm.
they go on to be rubber stamped in the general in a non competitive district. Um, and they can't be defeated if they do things that people don't like. This is why, right? Congress has an approval rating lodged, somewhere in the 20s on a good day, but they get reelected at a rate of 97, 98% of the vote. It's not that we even like our own individual representative. It's that we do not have the power to dislodge them at the ballot box any longer because these decisions are largely made in partisan primaries, which are closed, which can be won by a small handful, which have very low turnout because they are held at the most inconvenient times in the summer that they have outrageous registration deadlines for, right? I mean, if you wanted to vote in the Democratic primary in New York City, you had to register back in February, right? When nobody was thinking about this.
Mhm.
Not an accident. It should be really easy to register to vote. It's as simple as filling out a form. But if people don't want you to vote, and I'm talking here about Democrats and I'm talking about Republicans, you can set up a rule that says, well, you might be really excited about this candidate that you just heard about, but yeah, the deadline for this mid-June race passed back in early February. So we'll see you in 4 years. That's
Yeah.
not an accident. All of this is very specific and very intentional. Um, and it is designed to hold on to power.
Do you think that if they changed that system, ideally, what should happen? Should it be? I think it should be right up on, right up on the a primary election,
Well,
or
same day voter registration seems like it should be a no brainer. Many states have it. The states that do not have it at this point in time in 2025 have chosen not to have it because they do not want the citizens of their state to be able to vote quickly and easily.
and you say, and that's it.
That's it. There's really no other reason not to have it.
What is the problem with people voting? Help me to understand that, because as you well know, when the country was founded, everybody could not vote,
Right.
and there was pushback against the masses of people voting, right? And it seems like we're still in that fight.
Well, I think that this is the big question of America, and I mean, I think on a weekend like this, we can probably get a little bit heavier and historic. I think that there are two views of America. One of them is a country that was founded imperfectly, and imperfectly is a big word that covers up an awful lot of sin. And an awful lot of exclusion,
Mhm.
um, but that it is a country that, in Dr. King's words, has an arc of moral justice that bends toward progress, and
Mhm.
that we have slowly um, addressed and become a more inclusive place. We fought a civil war over slavery. We had the Reconstruction Amendments to the Constitution. We expanded the right to vote beyond the white men of property who had it originally, and we are bending toward justice.
Mhm.
The other view of this is that every time the arc bends toward justice, there are forces in our politics that wrest it back and come up with ways of maintaining the old bad status quo, even if they are dressing it up in, you know, the old stinky perfume in a pretty new bottle. And I think that that's probably closer to the way that I see the history of the country, right? That Reconstruction amendments are followed by Jim Crow. The and Jim Crow didn't just happen. Jim Crow happened because state after state across the South looked at the new numbers, right? They said, oh, now that blacks can vote in all of these states, in many of these states, there are more blacks than whites. So what's going to happen now? And so this is how Florida and Mississippi and Alabama began to amend their constitutions, how they began to make voting much more difficult, much more dangerous. Sometimes it would cost you and your family your life. And this was exacerbated. This was incentivized by rulings by the U.S. Supreme Court in the late 1860s and early 1870s that smothered Reconstruction and accelerated and incentivized the kinds of violence and lynchings and decades of Jim Crow that we saw across the South.
Well, wait a minute.
Only ended with the Voting Rights Act in 1965. I'm sorry.
No, I'm just sorry because I had to get that out. What are they afraid of when they see these numbers change?
Yeah.
When they see because white people have only wanted to be a part of the project. When you see the indigenous people who speak Spanish come back into the United States, which is where many of them are from, particularly when you go west, they just want to be a part of the American project. They don't want to tear it up.
Well, I think that if you were a white man in Mississippi in 1868, you were probably terrified, right? And you probably had a lot to be terrified of because of your own behavior in keeping people in chains for the previous decade. So maybe some of this begins with a fear of being held accountable and responsible for the foundations of the nation. But I think that most of this can be placed in the giant bucket of those who have the power do not want to give up and share the power. And that at every single point in our country's history in which power has been shared in a more inclusive and democratic manner, there has been the forces of backlash and retrenchment that have pushed against that. And that continues to this day, right? The decision of the U.S. Supreme Court on birthright citizenship the other day is in many ways an assault on the 14th Amendment, one of the crucial clauses of the most important amendments to our Constitution. It's the Reconstruction Amendments and the Civil Rights and Voting Rights Acts that made us a more inclusive democracy. Those should be considered the truest foundational articulation of what this country means, even more so than the Declaration of Independence or the Constitution. And yet there has been pushback against all of these things every step of the way, and it continues today. This is not a fight that ended with the end of the Civil War or the passage of the Reconstruction Amendments or the passage of the Voting Rights Act. All of this continues to be chipped away.
So when Peter Jennings, may God rest his soul, the great ABC journalist, one of his, I think it's probably his last major television special, he was talking about America. Although he was American, he was Canadian also. And he came here as a Canadian. And so he could be in America.
Canadian will be American soon enough.
Well, another 51st state. Well, if the Club of Rome has its way, but that's
Yeah.
another story for another day.
They can have 2 senators too.
Well, you know, the whole of it.
Yeah. The whole of it. I mean, it's one state.
From Montreal over to Vancouver.
All the way to Vancouver and have 2 senators.
I mean, yeah, and it would kind of work out like that. But no, because it's white, they would find a way to change the rules. You know that because
they're also French.
Come on, so you know. Yeah. But when you're looking at that, he said that Dr. King and Reverend James Lawson and his acolytes, Reverend Dr. Abernathy, that they were the new founding fathers of the new American Republic. He said because America really didn't become America until after the Civil Rights Movement, because everybody was really included after that. Right. But we're watching now. We're watching, of course. I had Dr. David Gibbs on my show yesterday, The Revolt of the Rich. And you saw in your book, you illustrated in your book, Rat Eft, that these guys said, hey, you can take the presidency. He can be black all day long. I don't care. What we're going to do, and it wasn't just his blackness, because he was a centrist. And he was much more aligned politically with them, and they knew it. But what they did not want was an empowered electorate, I think.
Right.
People who really wanted to make America what it's supposed to be. And my question for you then is, what should America be? What are the changes that you see, just having done this research, having seen how the right wing, because they think they take the long view, David Daley. They don't do, payday to Monday. They say, I got a plan. And you can have this. And in an 8-year period, and no one talked about it, Democrats lost more than 1,000 seats at every single level. The right wing, I'm not just going to say the Republicans, I will say the right wing retrenched.
Right.
They did a reset. And then if you look at everyone who's working for President Trump now, they're all kids, including J.D. Vance. Is J.D. Vance 40 yet? Did he turn 40?
I think just recently. I think
he is. That's it.
Not by much.
His wife is in her 30s. His press secretary is 25. He has a whole bunch of young guns.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, the Democrats have not done that. The Democrats stand in the way of all progress.
Well, yes, the Democratic Party is certainly run by a gerontocracy that refuses to share or give up any of its power, right?
But I'm not just talking about old folks. I mean, philosophically. I mean, they can put black faces in high places. I'm talking about people who are progressive. People who, Mom Donnie tapped into a vein, David Daley. You know that.
He most certainly did.
But so did India Walton 4 years ago up in Buffalo, New York.
Right.
A registered nurse who just started going from door to door, and she shocked the establishment. And he endorsed her campaign. I just had her on the show too. He endorsed her campaign 4 years ago.
Yeah. Well, I think that there is generational change coming. Okay. And I think that what happened in New York is going to be ought to be seen as the beginning of a movement that if I was a Democratic incumbent heading into next year, I would be awfully anxious and awfully nervous about being challenged by younger, more dynamic people. And I think that that kind of generational challenge is really long due. There's an amazing group called Run for Something, run by Amanda Littman, who has a new book out. I would encourage you to have her on the show if you haven't already. Amanda is sensational, and they've built a bench, right? And they've been teaching and showing people how to run. And I think it's important, right? These efforts don't happen within the Democratic Party. They happen from outside the party, and they have to be forced on it. And it might be forced on them this time via the primary.
Well, you're telling us they just don't happen. We have to make it happen.
We have to make them happen. And it's not easy, right? It's not as simple as saying, well, I'm going to run. then it costs, they've built a system in which you have to raise hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they've built a system in which you have to jump through hoops to get on the ballot. And, maybe the college kids who are excited by your campaign, well, if there's a primary, it's going to be held in July, so they can't vote in it. Or if it's held in September, as it is in my home state of Massachusetts, oh, well, you had to register 4 months ago, so sorry. So there are ways in which power holds on to power. But there is a big reckoning that is coming. I think the bill is due, and about to get paid.
David Daley, what is the path forward? Because now, like I said, our votes have consequences.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have a Mamdani who wins, it's very inspiring. You see that someone can come, he didn't come out of nowhere. He's someone who had been working with people. He's an assemblyman. He's a state assemblyman. But what he had done, he thankfully stayed under the radar of corporate media. They'd written him off. They hadn't even written him in. They just didn't even discuss him because he wasn't Cuomo, right? He wasn't one of the usual suspects. But he came from the people. He didn't come out of nowhere. He came from the people. But when you get into that space, you see the impediments that are standing between the people and power. And that's one of the things that you continue to tell us about. Gerrymandering is a very, very real issue. What can we do about that? Is that when we need to start looking at running for state office?
Yeah, we have to start looking at running for office at all levels, right? I mean, Mamdani, in many ways, is able to run and win in New York City because New York City elects using ranked choice voting in primaries. And so you had 11 candidates running for a mayor. You had one candidate in Andrew Cuomo who had the name recognition and all the money. And it looked as if he would be able to coast to victory, right? He had a 25-point lead back in March. And it seemed like he'd be able to use that, especially with a crowded field, right? When there's 11 candidates, you can usually win with 38, maybe even less, percent of the vote. And so all of the progressives were going to divide up their votes and spread it around. And instead, ranked choice says, that's not how it's going to work. Voters are going to have the power to rank the field in order. So if you like somebody, you can vote for them without fear that you are dividing the progressive vote or the young vote or the women vote or the black vote or any other kind of vote. And it encourages and incentivizes the kind of campaign that Mamdani ran so well, a campaign that goes out and engages people, that talks to people everywhere. In the old system, right, you're incentivized to go on TV and get the 35% of your vote, maybe even to do it by campaigning negatively against everybody who you are running against. And in this system, the incentives are the opposite. You have to get a majority. So you have to go out and talk to everybody. You have to go everywhere. And you can't simply go negative on the fellow people who you are competing with for votes, because you need those people to vote for you as a second choice if they don't vote for you as a first choice. So it encourages an entire different kind of campaign, one that we saw in New York, right? Mamdani and Bradlander cross-endorsing each other, going on Stephen Colbert together, going on bicycle trips across the city together. You saw Mamdani helping Adrian Adams raise money to qualify for public financing. You saw all of these things that we've never seen before in usual elections. You change the rules, you change the kind of election people get.
So that's what happens with ranked choice.
Well, because it's a ranked choice election, you have to get to 50 of the vote. Cuomo could not have won this with 35.
Well, wait a minute. What you're bringing up something that I hadn't thought about. So Cuomo really did not have allies.
Cuomo did not have allies, and he was running a campaign under old rules.
Okay.
He was running yesterday's campaign under today's rules. And if you run a campaign without looking at the rules first, right? I mean, if you were running for president and you said, well, I'm doing really, really well in California, I'm going to stay there and run up the score and get a lot of votes, that would be a bad strategy, because that's not how the race is scored. You can win California by 1 vote, or you can win it by 100 million votes. You're going to get the same number of electoral votes. In a ranked choice vote, you have to get to 51%, or 50% plus 1, right? Mm-hmm. And so you have to run by talking to everybody, by reaching out to everybody, and by asking other people, okay, you might not be voting for me first, but would you consider me second? Mm-hmm. You have to build alliances. You have to build coalitions. And this is the kind of work that could bring our politics back towards an America that actually represents all of us again.
So it allows you then to, okay, I don't like Mamdani on this issue. I like Landner better on this issue. But okay, if he doesn't, if Brad doesn't get it, then you know what, Zoran, okay, I'll go with you. I can live with that.
And before that, you had to say, well, I like Brad first because I don't like Zoran on this issue. But if I vote for Brad, am I splitting the progressive vote and helping Cuomo win? Under this, that goes away. That fear is off the table. You can say, I like Brad best. I'm going to rank him number 1. But I like Zoran second. I like Adrian Adams third. And I'm going to vote them in that order. And it means you no longer have to worry about spoiler. It means you no longer have to worry that by voting for the candidate you like best, you might accidentally have that backfire and elect the person you like least.
As we're moving into this, I think this consequential moment in our history, what are the reforms that Americans should be looking to take on?
Yeah. I think ranked choice voting is a really important reform, and that it's been passed in a lot of places. One of the fastest growing nonpartisan political reforms in American politics, and it delivers real results. I think what's happening in Portland, Oregon is really interesting on their city council, in which they have moved to a more proportional system. They expanded their council from 5 people to 12, and they've elected them from multi-member districts via a proportional form of ranked choice voting, so that you are able to win a seat at the table much easier from all different points of view. And I think it would be very exciting and meaningful if more cities took on a system like that. I think we have to really think about, especially as the 2030 census is coming upon us, and that'll be here faster than we think. We need to be thinking about redistricting reform, and the Supreme Court has made it much more difficult to fix this problem. But you look at a state like Michigan, which passed an independent commission in 2018, actually has a state legislature and a congressional delegation that swings with voters, right? Michigan state legislature had been so wildly gerrymandered that Republicans won it every single year throughout the 2010s, even when they won fewer votes. After voters fixed this and the new maps were drawn in 2021, when Democrats won more votes statewide in 2022, they won a majority of seats. When Republicans in 2024 won more votes, they won more seats, and took control back. What a crazy idea, right? The party with the most support wins. A majority of people get to choose who represents them. Um, that has been taken away from us in too many places. We can fix it, we can bring it back, but it is difficult work, and it takes doing these wonky, sometimes boring structural fixes. But let me tell you, right? It brings real results, and it can create the kind of campaigns that we just saw in New York City, which felt joyous, which felt celebratory, which felt like, as Mamdani said in his victory speech, it felt like the politics of the future.
And it made people, because it made people feel like they were winning. I think that when we're at the risk of we are at the risk of moving into a tremendous moment of social unrest. You know, when you have so little money, diminishing opportunities, everything more and more, Americans' lives and life options are diminished, and we know it, right?
We know it, and we know that we have very little say at the ballot box.
Yeah.
And so what we have to do is find ways that amplify our voice and our choice and make elections more meaningful and strengthen them and take this power back. It can be done. There's lots of evidence of what can happen when we reform these systems. You look at New York City, you look at Michigan, you look at Portland, you look at what's happened in Alaska, right? Where they opened primaries and moved to a top 4 system in Alaska. And they've elected conservatives and independents and Democrats that way. But they have actually elected majority candidates, right? Alaska and Maine, a couple of states that use systems like this, have proud traditions of independent candidates. They want to be able to choose from more than just 2 choices. But they hate that when you have more than 2 choices, it means that someone can win with 35% of the vote. And so it takes some of these structural fixes to give people back the voice and choice and power that they want to have. It can be done. Places are doing it. But, we have to get to work doing it every place.
Does that happen at the state level? Does it happen at the federal level, or both?
It can happen. It can happen at the city level. It can happen, the changes in Portland and in New York City were changes at the city level. The changes in Michigan were changes at the state level. Same as Alaska and Maine, citizens brought that to the ballot and won. And then they had to defend it at the ballot, right? The political establishment in Maine and in Alaska moved to take this power away. And voters said, hell no.
What do you mean?
Defended it. They went into state legislatures, or they brought competing ballot initiatives to say, we're going to go back to the old way. And voters in both of those states went to the polls and they said, no, we passed this reform because we wanted this reform. And you, our elected representatives who want to hold on to power, are going to actually try to say, we can't do this? No, we are underlining and reiterating what it was that we intended. And so this is a hard fight. It's sometimes a fight against our own representatives. But it's a fight that we should look around the country and take solace in the fact that fellow citizens have taken on these structures and won.
And so the people of New York City said, we want ranked choice.
Exactly. The people.
And so at the municipal level, they did that.
When they fixed their city charter and then passed those changes, they brought in ranked choice in primaries in New York City.
So, in these last few minutes here, what you're telling me is that the system was structured in such a way, and I saw this in my brother's book, former Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr., his book, A More Perfect Union. I'm going to send it to you. It's really brilliant. The way the country was structured, Americans have the power. It's just we don't know it. I mean, we have the power to completely reform the government. What did Kevin Costner say? His Jim Garrison character said in the movie JFK. I mean, because it is in the Constitution. If this form of government displeases you, throw it out and create a new one. Don't just throw it out. You got to create a new one. Otherwise, you have anarchy, everybody. But we have the power to make the reforms at the municipal, county, state, and federal levels.
We have more power than we think.
Hmm.
Sometimes our depression or the
Well, you're
bigness.
told by corporate media that that everything you
Yeah,
want is beyond your reach, and that you're
when
foolish
you
to
begin
dream.
to believe that, right?
Yeah.
Um, I'm not saying it's easy.
Okay.
The reforms that were won in all of these states and cities took time and effort, and lots of people giving up their nights and weekends and family time and collecting signatures and knocking on doors. But they can be won, because when you go out and talk to people, I think you find that we're not as polarized or as as we think, and that we share similar frustrations with the way that the system is working, and that there are solutions that we can all embrace together, right? Things. I mean, in New York City, um, there was a new poll yesterday that showed, you know, uh, that it's up in the 80s and 90%, the number of voters that liked ranked choice voting, that found it easy to use, that want to keep it. So when these reforms are made, they are very popular. You know,
Hmm.
Alaska and Maine dramatically reformed their system. Voters used it, voters liked it, voters then went out and defended it in another initiative. Um, so, um, you know, anti gerrymandering rules, uh,
Hmm.
something Americans, left, right, and center agree on. Reform of the US Supreme Court, something Americans left, right, and center agree
Hmm.
on. So these structural reforms have dramatic public support. We need a few more champions in public life. And But it's natural, I think, that the status quo rises up against this or paints it as very difficult. But this is going to be the fight of the rest of our lifetimes, I think, and the kind of country and the kind of representation that we have and that we will pass down to future generations is going to depend on the kind of fight we put up in this moment right now.
As you've as we close, as you have, I say it's a trilogy. You certainly could come out with more, but thus far, we
Oof.
have Rat F, we have Unrigged, we have Anti-Democratic. Anti-Democratic, of course, is your latest book. What have you learned as you have pulled these tremendous pieces of work together? And what I love about them is that they're written almost they're written in a way that's very accessible. It's written in a literary way, not in it's academic in terms of the information you give, but it's not written as a school book. Everybody, it really is. They're quite fun to read because they make everything palatable. But what have you learned as you pull these three tremendous pieces of work together?
The right planned for this moment. What has happened to state legislatures, to the Supreme Court, it's not an accident. It's the result of careful plotting and thinking and efforting over many decades. So, not an accident, not simply exploiting advantages inside the system. It was figuring out what needed to be done and then going out and doing it to win power at all levels and hold on to it. So I would start there. But, I mean, I also think that great numbers of us stand opposed to any effort to make elections fait accompli or to end them before they start again, right? I mean, when I was reporting Unrigged, and forgive me if I've told this story on the show before, but I love it. I was out in Idaho. I was out in Idaho Falls, a city way out central, way out in eastern Idaho, way up north, and small, very Mormon, very conservative town, and people were door knocking to win an initiative to expand Medicaid there, because there was, it's the donut that, you know, lots and lots of people fell into, that Obamacare fixed, but that a lot of states did not agree to accept. And Idaho was one of those states that wouldn't accept it. And so citizens went out and said, well, we'll win this through the initiative process. And we went up to knock on this door, and there's a bumper sticker on the pickup truck in the driveway as we're walking up that says, Vietnam, we were winning when I left. I thought to myself, well, we could just go knock on the other door, guys. This guy was winning Vietnam single-handedly back in '66. Maybe we don't want to knock on this door. And they went up and knocked on the door anyway. And the guy comes to the door, and they tell him what they're there for. And he starts to nod his head, and he's like, yes, my daughter falls into that. I totally understand this. I'm with you, and I'm going to vote for it. So when we talk to one another, when we do this work, we can knock down these barriers between us. We can bridge these partisan gaps that seem so massive, but we have to do it together, right? I mean, Idaho has made it much more difficult to get on the ballot and do this in the future. The U.S. Congress right now is trying to cut all of those Medicaid dollars and dollars to help rural hospitals like the ones in like the ones in Idaho Falls. So our own representatives are not on our side in this fight, but perhaps on this weekend of all weekends, we ought to be thinking about what it is we the people can do, that we the people can still build a more perfect union. But there's folks standing in the way of us getting it done, which makes the work harder. But perhaps on this day, we can rededicate ourselves to that task and to that work.
David Daley, everybody. 3 books. Rat F-U-C-K.
Don't say it on the radio.
I can't.
But ask for it by name at your local bookstore.
That's right. They'll love to tell you.
You can say it there.
That's right. Unrigged.
Freedom of speech. We're celebrating that this weekend too.
Oh my goodness. Well, you're full of some zingers today. Yeah, we are. But unless you're Elon, who's being threatened with deportation and losing his business. Woo! Hey, there's a lot going on, but you know what? You do have the power. And I want you to get these books because they really will help you to understand why we are and where we are. And they help to point a way toward the future. When I've read these books by David Daley, he really lays out for us just how much power we have. The system has been built for we the people to have the power. Now we've got to seize it. We've got to believe it. We've got to believe it on every level of government, municipal, county, state, federal. You've got the power. We do. We can have the government that not only we need, but that the least of these deserve. If you protect the least of these, and everybody else has covered everybody. May God bless you. And you have cracked Robert Williams up. Yes, when you go to the bookstore, don't say the word. Well, you can say it, but I just can't say it on the radio. My father used to love ribbing David about it. Oh my goodness. AM 950 Radio, the voice of progressive Minnesota. I'm Santita Jackson.